vision or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Evelyn, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 14th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Who will actually thrive in the hybrid AI human workforce? A panel of experts explains how job seekers should prepare for the future of work. This May, a new genre of viral video emerged, clips from several college commencements at which the new grads heartily booed speakers who talked about AI, and it's hard to blame them, given recent headlines about how the technology is poised to disrupt the labor market, particularly for entry-level workers like themselves. Many of these young people grew up hearing that learning to code was the ticket to a six-figure salary, only to graduate into a job market in which human computer programmers look like an endangered species. While it's not at all clear whether AI has actually reduced the total labor force yet, individual companies have announced large layoffs linked to plans to use AI to automate jobs. All of which raises a vexing question. If you're a college student today, or arguably any worker confronting this uncertain landscape, how should you prepare for the AI future of work? There's no easy answer, but we assembled a panel of 4 experts who are closely following the impact of AI on work to try to help shed light on this question. This discussion has been edited and condensed for clarity, with some material added from follow-up interviews. The participants, Darren Asimoglu, economist at MIT and a Nobel laureate, Jean Ball, formerly an advisor on AI and emerging technology for the Trump administration, now a senior fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation, Ethan Malik, professor at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and the author of Co-Intelligence and the Forthcoming Coexistence. Clara Shai, formerly top AI executive at Salesforce and Meta, co-founder of New Work Foundation, a nonprofit that aims to help entry-level workers navigate AI. And Bill Wasick, moderator, editor of the Science Desk at the New York Times and formerly the editorial director of the Times Magazine. Bill Wasick. The conversation about AI and the future of work is a frustrating one. It's not just that everyone's predictions are all over the map. Elon Musk saying there will come a point when no job is needed because the AI will be able to do everything, or the Chinese AI executive Kai-Fu Lee predicting in 2017 that AI would displace 50% of the workforce in the next 10 years, but that they're rarely coupled with any insight into how or why AI might eliminate jobs. What will a hybrid AI-human workforce look like? How will our own jobs change as a result? Those to me are the much more interesting questions. Ethan Malik. I've had this fun exercise in which I've asked the AIs themselves to give me a scenario of future work in an AI era. It will usually start with something like Marcus Chen, that's one of the chatbot's favorite names for software developers, goes into the office where he reads reports from his AI agents about what work has been done and then uses his judgment to assign them new tasks. But then I'll ask the AI, wait, why is he going into the office if the AI is doing the work? So then the chatbot will say, no, you're right, and start over. Marcus Chen wakes up at his beach house and checks in on his AI agents, and then I'll ask, why is he even checking in if the agents are doing all the work? At which point, the chatbot will apologize again and say, Marcus Chen sits at the beach. A lot of this comes down to the question of which kind of world we're in. Is it one where AI is a fairly normalish technology and change comes more slowly? Or is it a world where AI actually becomes super capable? Computer programming is now offering a really good view of this kind of thing. It used to be that being a coder was writing good code on a regular basis. Now suddenly, in the course of a few months, it becomes about managing engineering tasks. So I think you're going to see other shifts in what people's jobs are expected to be. Clara Shy, I want to build on the Marcus Chen metaphor. Let's assume we get to that last scenario. He's on the beach, he's having a great life. But what about the other workers? It is now faster, more efficient to have fewer cooks in the kitchen. Darren Asamoglu, right. How many Marcus Chens can the American economy employ? It's just not realistic to think that 100 million people will work like Marcus Chen. Dean Ball, I'm very bullish about AI, but I have a somewhat more moderated view on the practical effects, and the fundamental reason for that is that the professions we're talking about are highly automated professions, right? Sending an email is an incredibly automated process compared to what we used to have to do to communicate written text with one another. Coding is intrinsically highly automated. If you want to talk about mining or agriculture, those are incredibly mechanized already. So the fact that we can take the driver out of the mining truck is a very small portion of the vast majority of the cost of mining. The transformation that's coming is going to take place in the world as it is familiar to us today, and every single day will feel familiar, and there'll be tiny, tiny changes along the margin. There'll be tiny bits of automation along the margins, and 10, 15, 20 years later, we'll look back and we'll say, my God, everything is different, but you'll never notice it happening. That's the way it always goes. Asamoglu, there are a lot of things that AI models currently and in the near future will not be able to do. The current view is that somehow agents are going to do a lot of the work and we just need to supervise them. I find that very unrealistic. But if it was realistic, it would be a horrible thing. Shy, agree and disagree with you. I'm building a tech startup today, so this is not theoretical. I started about 2 months ago. I think back to our first 30 days when we had 0 employees. Prior to the AI agent world, there's no way that we would have been able to incorporate, file all our IRS State of California designations, and figure out our privacy policy in a matter of days with so few people. In the past, we would have needed to hire dozens of people and engage with multiple external law firms, marketing and design agencies, etc., working over many months. So AI displacement is realistic and real, and it's both horrible and wonderful. Malik, the supercharging of entrepreneurship is a very big deal. You have very early work with GPT-4 showing that it helped successful Kenyan entrepreneurs get better stuff done because they got better advice. Ase Moglu, though one finding in economics is that if a lot of people can enter into an occupation or an economic activity, you get excess entry that's very, very costly and very distortionary. So I'm worried about exactly what that happening in entrepreneurship. Malik. Meanwhile, if you are, Coca-Cola or Walmart, the nature of change is a little bit different. And there's no obvious plan for how do I implement this? How do I reorganize my company around AI agents? There's physical labor and there's an organizational structure that's been built up. And everything involves meetings and conversations. You're also not going to replace Walmart overnight. So I think we will see a boom in startups. But I think many things are slowed down by this, and that gives us time to react. Wasik, I would love to think about the Marcus Chens, so to speak, from industries other than the tech industry. The question of which types of work are most threatened. Clara, you're starting a nonprofit to help entry-level workers navigate this transition. I'm curious to hear about what industries are front of mind for you. When you think about this as a potential crisis moment for entry-level workers across the board. Shy. I think if you just look at companies like Amazon over the last 10 years, it's a great example of how this plays out. There are more than 1 million workers at Amazon, and a fraction of them are part of the elite group. They're coders, they're supervising systems, they are working at HQ, and everyone else works in the warehouse and as delivery drivers, and they are managed to the minute. What their tasks should be, how long they should be spending getting from stop A to stop B, and over time I expect more and more of their tasks, including the delivery and the driving, to be taken over by AI. I see that playing out in multiple industries. Beyond that, let's add to the Marcus Chen portfolio. Let's talk about Stacy Smith, a hypothetical health insurance claims adjuster. She and millions of people like her are employed in the U.S. in insurance and banking because of regulatory reasons that those jobs could not be offshored. But now a lot of those approvals, whether it's mortgage underwriting or claims adjusting, are easily done by AI agents, more consistently, more easily able to detect fraud, much more cheaply. What's going to happen to the Stacy Smiths who are making a decent wage in places like Kentucky and Mississippi? What about Bob Johnson? Let's talk about him. He is a long-distance truck driver. He is one of 3.5 million truck drivers in the U.S. who again make a decent wage. They live in the South. They live in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. They are the breadwinners for their family. They're the pillars of their community. What happens when the Waymo technology diffuses and we get past regulatory barriers to the Bob Johnsons? So maybe Marcus has a great outcome. What about Stacy? What about Bob? Ball, I think if we want to get into specific industries or roles, the obvious ones are consulting, marketing, customer service, entry-level legal work, administrative work. All that is definitely real. And then there's this fuzzy layer of things in the physical world. I'm kind of doubtful that a humanoid robot's going to be making you a cocktail at a bar, even if it could, right? People don't want that, and that's a very important thing for thinking about the future of work. What are people's preferences going to be? Similarly, a lot of knowledge work in the end, especially as you move up the ranks, comes down to persuading people of things. I find myself skeptical that the process of internal politicking within a firm or another organization is just going to be automated away by AI. Malik. The story inside big firms will be complicated. I think at Procter & Gamble we did an experiment with 776 of their employees. They either were technical or business people, and they either worked individually or on teams of 2. The finding at the time was individuals using AI performed as well as teams not using AI. To me, the really interesting part was that it also blurred lines between roles. Business people used to have business ideas. Tech people came up with technical ideas. But add AI and everyone comes up with ideas in between each other. And that's happening everywhere. When I talk to people in coding, especially in industries that have some quasi-creative element, like the gaming industry, suddenly the people who are designers can code. Suddenly the coders can do design work. The artists can start writing. Asimaglu, let me turn the question around and talk about 3 industries that I think are absolutely critical for future productivity: manufacturing, healthcare, and education. All of them show the potential for AI, but also the huge bottlenecks. In manufacturing, the U.S. is behind China in applying AI to manufacturing, and every small step of additional introduction of automation or AI into the manufacturing process requires a huge amount of engineering services. It's very laborious. Then there's education, where the effects of AI so far have been a huge disaster. There's a nice large-scale study coming out from China, for example, which shows horrible, horrible outcomes from students who use AI. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 14th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. With healthcare, the promise has been in digitization, for example, with electronic health records and more addition of software into the process, but that so far seems to have led to a worsening of productivity. So the potential for AI to do cost saving is there, but I don't think anybody has a good roadmap of how to do that. Chatbots are potentially useful in healthcare, but my fear is that we're going to repeat exactly what we did in education, unleashing chatbots in a way that really leads to horrible outcomes. Ball. But, Darren, you mentioned chatbots. If all we had were chatbots, I would probably share your pessimism, but the remarkable thing about the new coding agents is that they're essentially computer programs that can use computers, right? Malik, yes, I don't think we're talking about chatbots anymore. The world has changed in the last 5 years, and we already know from data that AI is better at medical diagnosis than doctors under many circumstances. And controlled experiments show patients prefer talking to AI over doctors because it has higher empathy, perceived empathy, I should say. Similarly, with AI in education, research has found that unstructured AI use hurts learning, but AI tutors can have large-scale positive impacts. So I actually am incredibly bullish about AI and education once we figure out how to actually integrate AI tutors in the classrooms. Wasik, I'm curious about new opportunities that will exist in the AI world. What do you tell a young person about interesting potential skills or careers to think about for the future? Ball, in many ways, I think curious generalists will do quite well in the future. That's not to say you don't want to cultivate narrow niches of expertise, but that also being able to step back and think broadly will be rewarded. I also think there are obvious high-demand areas in the physical world, in particular things like plumbing and electricians and HVAC technicians. Malik, though I also don't think we can predict well enough to say, go be a plumber, because then the plumber 10,000 could come out in a couple of weeks. It's very hard to anticipate the future. Asimaglu, the job of electricians, HVAC technicians, all of these are going to become more complex. We already have a huge shortage of these trades. Again, AI can be massively helpful. A novice electrician with the right AI tool could be 10 times as productive as they are at the moment. Using AI for training electricians with new equipment could be hugely useful, but that's not where the center of gravity of the investments in AI are going. Wasik, what advice would you give a smart young person in terms of how to think about where there might be opportunities we don't even know about yet? Shai, I get to spend all day every day with 25-year-olds now, and what I've found is a lot of the advice that's out there and a lot of the AI courses out there are too general. We just launched a content platform that goes role by role across the 50 most common entry-level white-collar jobs: marketing, software engineering, accounting, finance, etc. And we interview hiring managers to understand how they're deploying AI in their organizations and how that's changed the specific skills that they're looking to hire. The recurring theme is that it's a tale of two cities for job seekers. Those who know how AI works, specifically AI agents, can get their dream job, whether it's in marketing or software, accounting, finance, you name it. Those who don't have those skills, those entry-level jobs are disappearing. Wasik, but how helpful will that AI training really be in the long term? As the models get better, it seems like different instincts and different skills are required to get what you want out of them, while the hacks you needed with earlier models just completely go away. Almost their whole magic trick is that they make everything so seamless as they get better. Shy, AI skilling is a moving target for sure. You're on the train, but you know that there's no destination. You know what you're signing up for is constantly learning and evolving your technique as the model is changing. It means signing up for continually testing different models as they come out and starting to recognize, okay, I use Gemini for this task, but Claude is much better for this. That's part of the evolving skill set that I think is going to become necessary. Malik, what I really worry about with junior workers is that field experience is often crucial to evaluating work you didn't create yourself. Whether it comes from humans or AI, Bill, you can probably glance at an article for the Times and tell whether it's good or bad. Darren or I can look at an academic paper instantly and say whether it's going to be worth an hour of our time to read or not. Dean can scan a piece of AI legislation and spot the loophole. Clara can, I'm sure, look at any bit of code and judge whether it was written by an idiot or an expert. If you have no experience, you can't do those things. And that's what it takes to manage AI agents too. This isn't just an issue with junior workers. There was a survey a while ago that only a third of people want leadership positions. Most people are very happy with what their job is, and they just want to do it. And I think they're going to be having some trouble adjusting. Shy, being a manager has already gotten better thanks to AI. Asimaglu, I actually think most managers feel overburdened, behind a curve, don't know what is expected of them. I think their stress level is much higher. Perhaps in 10 years' time it will be better, but we need to standardize those tools and standardize the expectations. Retrain the managers, perhaps. So no, I don't think at the moment being a manager is a better occupation at all, actually. Shy, I believe every young person needs to work on a side project while they're in college, if not high school, that they own end to end, so that they're evolving with these models. And if they do that, I believe that they'll have a lot of the practical experience they need to get hired. Malik, but as somebody who teaches entrepreneurship, not everyone does this, right? I've given people these side projects, like that's what my job has been for over a decade, giving young people side projects, and it's not for everyone. There are all kinds of differences, including in background or socioeconomic status, in how people take advantage of those opportunities. It's a hard thing to just say, do the side project and make it work. Shy, it is very hard, and we're not going to have a 100% hit rate, but it is very difficult to then really understand and stay in control of AI if you don't learn something end to end. Really taking it all the way through to understand the outer limits of what AI can do and understand how models evolve, that is the core skill set. Asimaglu, I think what Clara described is the reality. Right now, you have to spend a lot of time learning different models, their capabilities, their shortcomings, and then 3 months later, you have to experiment with lots of different models again in order to just stay where you are. That is absolutely not productive. That's very dystopian. Clara, perhaps you were describing that as an okay future. To me, that's a horrible future. Shy, I said earlier that it's wonderful and horrible. How do we make it less horrible and more wonderful? Wasik, so this brings us around to the last question. What do we do about all of this? Dean, I know you were involved in helping to draft the White House's AI action plan. I'm just curious to know what you think the governmental and societal response should be. Ball, the action plan conveniently happens to state my beliefs quite well, which is that the first thing we need to do is measure this problem much better than we currently do. We need better empirical economic data. You can't create policy remedies for a problem you don't understand. But I really don't want to create inflexibility in the labor market. My favorite line in the White House Action Plan describes AI as a combination of the Industrial Revolution, the Information Revolution, and the Renaissance. It has the potential to transform the way we make and produce things. It will change the way information flows through organizations and the world, and it will enable artistic and mathematical and scientific breakthroughs. Now the Pope seems to want us to have a committee of all the AI stakeholders, all the impacted communities. But we didn't create a stakeholder committee for the Industrial Revolution. It didn't unfold by show of hands. It's unbelievable to me that there are so many people in polite society who think that's what we need to apply to AI. Asamaglu. Well, I guess that summarizes the attitude of some people in Silicon Valley. Yeah, there was no committee for the direction of the Industrial Revolution, and what did we get? In the early stages, we got children working to death in coal mines. Conditions in factories became horrible. Wages for many workers fell. Now AI is changing things much faster and affecting many, many sectors at the same time. Shy, right. The lesson isn't that coordination is unnecessary. It's that skipping it costs us decades of human suffering. Also, AI policies that emerge without broad input will not be trusted, as they will be perceived to represent the agenda of big tech, capital, or one political faction. Ball, I don't know what the employment rate will be in 2028, but I guarantee you that 100% of it is going to be blamed on AI by the American public and by lots of opportunistic politicians. And unfortunately, I worry that the policy remedies they reach for are going to be things that lock in very vast kinds of labor protections, things that create the kinds of problems Europe has, which is that their firms can't take risks because taking risks involves doing things that might require you to fire people in 5 years if the thing you tried didn't work out. I worry that we're going to do similar things here, and a lot of what's going to happen at the state level. We'll blab about it in Washington, but the actual action will be in 50 different state houses, and we'll all pretend like we know what's going on there, but no one really will. And we will sort of sleepwalk into a very bad political economy. Shy, I agree with that. I mean, you look at the reaction to Eric Schmidt's commencement speech at the University of Arizona, the recent Gallup poll showing that a third of Gen Z Americans describe their feelings toward AI as anger, and these are people we want embracing AI so that they can help build this economy and they can find work, but they're rejecting it on a moral basis. That's why I believe that an intervention is needed now. That's why we're building AI agents to help connect job seekers with opportunities and help them learn AI skills so that they don't have to fear it and that they can shape it. But we have to do something. Asamaglu, I am convinced that artificial intelligence is quite different from human intelligence. Humans are not very good at absorbing massive volumes of information or sifting through unstructured data for relevant patterns. AI models have, as yet, no genuine creativity and no capacity for trial and error learning grounded in interaction with the physical world. When two things are different, the last thing you want is to try to mimic one with the other. It is a fool's errand to try to get one to do everything that the other one does. They should work together. and those aren't the kinds of models we're trying to develop. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 14th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Malik, we are going to obviously need to think about how we train new workers. But how do we even assess young workers when they come on board? Because we used to assess them. We had this great technique, which was apprenticeship. It's worked for 4,000 years. I hire a white-collar worker, and they do grunt work for me, and they work really hard, and I get to assess how good they are at the grunt work. And as a middle manager, I get the advantage of having someone do the work I don't want to do, and they learn, and I assess them, and everyone gets paid. And that all collapsed, right? You can't just say, oh, we should hire junior workers if we haven't thought about how to train junior workers. But guess what? Universities are actually quite good at training and assessing. So colleges could start to think about extending or changing professional education to fill in the gaps where AI is creating them. Shai, I think the biggest takeaway for me is where we started, which is the future isn't automatic. I'm neither a pessimist nor an optimist. I'm a conditional optimist, and there are interventions that we still can try, that we should try, because we're going to have to test many things before we know what will work. And there's still time, but the window is closing. I do think that the key thing about AI agents is that they all have a goal, and it depends on who deploys it, because whoever deploys it gets to set the goal. Maybe the goals of AI so far haven't been aligned with the goals of regular people, with everyday workers, but that's a choice we can make. A Murdoch builds his own media empire. Is this succession or secession? James Murdoch says acquiring New York Magazine and Vox has nothing to do with his father, but in some ways it's a tribute. By Jim Rutenberg. Jim Rutenberg has reported on the Murdoch family for nearly 3 decades and across 3 continents. He spoke with James Murdoch for this article. It is an enduring feature of our nation's leading, for now, media dynasty, the Murdochs, that they continually generate news as a force in politics and culture, as a bellwether of their industry, and as a family whose fights have been soapy enough to inspire 4 seasons of Succession. The family's story arc, though, appeared to reach its zenith last September. That was when Rupert Murdoch ended a wrenching family legal battle over future control of his conservative media empire with 3 of his 4 oldest offspring, James, Liz, and Prue, and made their more right-leaning brother, Lachlan, his undisputed business heir. Driving the drama was Rupert's fear that upon his death James would swoop in with his sisters to pull the Murdoch news outlets, including Fox News and the New York Post, to the left. Rupert's liberal critics pined for the same outcome, but Rupert and Lachlan, who now runs the companies, came to an accommodation with the wayward children in which they would cede their claims in return for more than $1 billion each. That seemed to be that. Then came news last month that James would buy New York Magazine, Vox.com, and the Vox Media Podcasting Network for an estimated $300 million. Small by the standards of today's media deals, the purchase nonetheless grabbed attention because of what it represented, the most visible move by James to leave his father's gargantuan shadow. It signaled a break from a legacy that James has publicly associated with climate change, denialism, and the insidious and uncontrollable forces that caused the January 6th riots. He holds that his father's empire has spread toxic political content in pursuit of ratings and revenue, degrading civic health and its own corporate standing. Coverage of the deal has portrayed James as acquiring an ideological competitor to the outlets run by his brother, though it would be the equivalent of fighting a destroyer with a speedboat. The notion made sense. The family fight had always taken place within the family media business. Now it would play out through rival media businesses. James disclaims any connection between his acquisition and his family's travails. When the Times asked him if he wanted to differentiate himself from his father, he said flatly no. I'm just trying to build a great business, he said. But when I spoke with James last week, it was clear that he was setting out with an editorial philosophy that carries at least an implicit rebuke of his father's populist, winner-take-all philosophy. That outlook and many keen insights about what viewers really desire built the Fox empire. It also turbocharged a practice of partisan combat that raced far beyond Murdoch's control and shaped a worldwide ecosystem of misinformation. James is looking toward independent media as a higher-minded, if less lucrative, antidote to those forces. In their business choices, the two men, and the gulf between their visions, capture the divergent paths of American media in the industry's roiling 2020s. There is no denying the Oedipal undertones of James' latest deal. New York Magazine was one of his father's first big buys in the United States. Completed in 1977, it came right after Rupert bought the New York Post. It was an early sign that the paterfamilias, then 45, was intent on building something huge and that he would be ruthless in the pursuit. At the time, New York Magazine was a showcase for the new, more literary form of reportage known as New Journalism, featuring powerful writers like Tom Wolfe, Gail Sheehy, and Norman Mailer. But the founding editor, Clay Felker, was at loggerheads with the publication's board of directors over finances and control. Felker had helped Murdoch to land the Post by bringing him together in the Hamptons with its owner, Dorothy Schiff, as she was contemplating a sale. Now he asked Murdoch for advice. Murdoch counseled Felker to buy up the controlling shares, and with them his own independence, the story goes. But then Murdoch slyly got in touch with Felker's disaffected board and arranged to buy the publication himself. Felker declared that Murdoch had double-crossed him and minted the Baron's reputation as a villain in elite media circles. With the construction of his empire underway, Murdoch proclaimed a basic editorial premise. "We're here to give the public what they want," he told the Los Angeles Times. In those post-Watergate years, Murdoch believed that American journalists were practicing a form of intellectual showmanship, piously telling people what to think instead of considering what they wanted to know. It was a savvy reading of a large audience there for the taking, and Rupert lured them in with a populist mix of mayhem, sex, gossip, and a good dose of right-leaning politics that would extend to his most successful American project, Fox News. James and his siblings were inculcated with the same philosophy as they vied to succeed their father. For a while at least, James publicly embraced the credo. James first appeared to sour on his father's way after the News of the World, Murdoch's British tabloid, hacked the phone messages of celebrities, royals, and a missing 13-year-old girl, all in pursuit of irresistible scoops. The activity predated James' oversight, but he took much of the public heat as the full extent of it came to light in 2011. As Jonathan Mailer and I reported in 2019, James blamed his father for setting the tone that led to the scandal, win the audience whatever the cost. But his fuller break started as the Murdoch outlets backed the right-wing populist wave sweeping much of the globe in 2016. Murdoch's preeminent tabloid, The Sun, helped fuel the Brexit campaign to withdraw Britain from the European Union, and then Fox News hosts fell into cadence with Donald J. Trump as he won the presidency, often defending his wilder rhetoric. his both sides line regarding the riotous white nationalist rally in Charlottesville, VA, or amplifying pro-Trump counterfactuals and exaggerations that Barack Obama used British intelligence to spy on Trump, that a migrant caravan, possibly including terrorists, was coming to invade America. Running the businesses at the time in an uneasy partnership with his brother and father, James hoped to impose a stricter adherence to journalistic principles on opinion shows and rein in the more strident hosts. He argued that Fox could still be plenty conservative and remain the top cable news network without coloring so far outside the lines. But ratings had never been better, and his bid for restraint was a non-starter with his father and brother. James finally left his operational role at the family empire in 2019 after helping to sell the Fox movie studios to the Walt Disney Company. Walking away with $2 billion from that deal, he and his wife, Catherine Murdoch, dedicated themselves to a new philanthropic endeavor that carried a hint of penance for the source of their fortune. They would fund projects in media and politics that would restore the health of our U.S. democracy at a time of increasing polarization and dysfunction within the system, as their foundation's website put it. If there were any doubt that they were talking about the Murdoch empire, they dispelled it after January 6th when Fox came under scrutiny for airing the so-called Dominion conspiracy theory that voting machines had helped steal the election from Trump. In a statement after the riots, James and Catherine pointed indirectly but unmistakably at the family business. Many media property owners have as much responsibility for this as the elected officials who know the truth but choose instead to propagate lies. Since 2019, the pair has awarded around $45 million in journalism grants, including to the Associated Press for climate change coverage, to the 19th for its coverage of gender and politics, to the American Journalism Project, which supports local newsrooms, and to the nonprofit that publishes the journal Science. They also invested in The Bulwark, a Never Trump publication. That bought them cachet in the journalistic precincts that Fox's hosts regularly slam, though skepticism occasionally emerges. There was palpable letdown when James accepted the payout and renounced any claim to the Fox throne, precluding the possibility of changing it from within, and he has faced questions for quietly serving on the board of Tesla while its chief executive, Elon Musk, turned his social platform X into a hub for disinformation. To what extent is James' acquisition a true revolt against his father's legacy or an accidental homage? James says he will leave New York Magazine and Vox a long leash to cover stories the way they want. After an initial shakeup, Rupert, too, allowed the magazine to pursue journalism on its own terms during the 15 years that he owned it. More recently, Rupert did not appear to stand in the way as the Wall Street Journal, also part of his empire, churned out reports that embarrassed and infuriated the Trump administration. It has also drawn a $10 billion lawsuit from Trump. In some ways, James' latest play mirrors his father's move to purchase the Post. Rupert imbued the tabloid with an ID-forward populism that spoke to the right-leaning working-class sensibilities of Queens and Nassau County, a formula he eventually brought to Fox News. He gave that audience what it wanted. Similarly, New York Magazine and Vox embody the id-forward sensibilities of left-leaning North Brooklyn Lower Manhattan, and hipster Los Angeles. New York Magazine is pop culture criticism, gossip about media moguls, Nepo baby trend spotting, and the future of the Democratic Party. Vox's mission is to explain the wonkiest subjects for smart laypeople, and under James' corporate umbrella, they will share a stable with other elite holdings, including the entities that run the Art Basel and Tribeca Film Festivals. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 14th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. James, like his father, has built a portfolio to serve its niche. It's just that his consumers are college-educated, urbanite tastemakers, not working-class members of Trump's base. In other, more direct ways, though, James is at least implicitly rejecting his father's way. Where Rupert's arrival in New York cast him as a villain to its journalistic establishment, a tag he wore proudly, James offers himself as a white hat, which his new reporting staff has greeted with a mix of hope and wariness. In our interview, James told me he was building an ideas business. He argues that the journalism of New York Magazine and the podcasts of people like Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway will take on more value as artificial intelligence swallows everything. There's this tsunami of garbage, he said, something that is editorially crafted, either by an individual writer or by an editorial mind across a number of different writers and subjects. I think that value is very clear, and I think it actually becomes more valuable. That differentiation, he has concluded, won't come from catering to the mass algorithmic distribution that updates Rupert's old formula. Give the public what they want, whatever they want. Denying that directive may cost him. If you're just sitting there trying to get the clicks, and then you're feeding the lab rat cocaine in the corner of the cage, James said, I guess it's good business. That doesn't seem like a great thing to spend all your time doing. He thought about it. It may be that over the long term, you structurally make less money, but not pandering to people. Maybe that's true, and maybe it's still okay. There were, he said, different goals in the ideas business than just profiteering. Perhaps, in James' mind, he really wasn't drawing a distinction with his father when he sent his bid for these new properties, but if he reproduces the intellectual showmanship that his father once derided, well, maybe that's okay with him too. Her throat was on fire. What was wrong? Swallowing and talking had become excruciating for the young woman, and her symptoms were progressing quickly. By Lisa Sanders, M.D. My symptoms are back, the 32-year-old woman texted to her brother, woke up with a swollen tonsil and a hard time swallowing. Her brother, 9 years older and physician, sat up in bed. It was 10 p.m., West Coast time where he was, and 1 a.m. in Boston where his sister lived. A couple of weeks earlier, his sister, a self-described germaphobe, texted him that she had a sore throat. She had returned from traveling in Taiwan 2 weeks earlier, and a day or two later awoke feeling some tenderness when she swallowed. It was all on the right side. When she looked in her mouth with a mirror, she could see that her throat was red and that her tonsil was large and bulging toward the middle. For the first few days, she alternated doses of acetaminophen and ibuprofen, and that helped. But the pain came back as soon as the medicine wore off. Eventually, she went to the health center at MIT, where she was a graduate student. She was seen by a physician assistant who listened to her concerns and examined her throat. He took a swab and checked for strep. The results came back in minutes, negative. It was probably a virus, he told her, and should get better in a few days. He gave her a prescription for 6 days of a steroid called methylprednisolone to help her with her symptoms. Hearing this, her brother was a little concerned. Steroids would reduce the swelling and pain, but they do that by suppressing the immune system. He didn't say anything. He was a hospitalist, working with patients who were admitted to the hospital, and he hadn't worked in an outpatient setting in over a decade. Maybe this was usual practice. By the second day, her swelling and pain were gone, and she felt totally back to normal. She reported happily. She finished the course of meds and forgot about her throat. But 2 or 3 days after she finished the steroids, she awakened with the same terrible sore throat. If anything, swallowing felt maybe a little worse, and her right tonsil once again raged red and bulged toward the middle. She went back to the health center that morning. The doctor was kind and thoughtful as he ran through the now familiar list of questions. She had no fever, no cough, no runny nose, no wheezing, no trouble breathing, just a really sore throat. Eating was nearly impossible, and talking was absolute torture. He saw that her throat was red and her right tonsil enlarged, just as it had been 2 weeks earlier. He sent a rapid strep test, and once again it was negative. This time he sent a culture of her throat to be sure she didn't need antibiotics. But he agreed with the physician assistant she saw earlier that this probably was a virus. He sent her to the lab for some blood work and advised her to continue to treat the pain and drink a lot of water. She loaded up on acetaminophen and ibuprofen, but the pain just wouldn't quit, so she reached out to her brother once more. Did you finish the steroids? He texted back. Yes, a couple of days ago. He said they probably just wore off and that's why the pain is back, she replied. Sounds reasonable, he agreed. But that evening, the young woman started to feel worse. She had chills. Her body ached. She took ibuprofen and then Tylenol. We really have to be grateful for our health, she texted her brother. That didn't sound like her sister, so he picked up the phone and called. When she didn't answer, he reached out on FaceTime. You really don't know how often you swallow until it hurts like this, she told him. Her voice sounded strange, almost unrecognizable. Do you have a fever? He asked. She didn't know. He had her take her temperature. He heard the thermometer beep. 100.4 degrees, she reported. It worried him that she had even a low-grade temperature after she'd taken ibuprofen and Tylenol. Hold the camera up so I can see the inside of your throat, he said. It was as if she had described. The back of her throat was very red, and the tonsil and surrounding area were swollen, but only on the right side. Her brother was worried. With her red, swollen throat and oddly muffled voice, he suspected that she might have a peritonsillar abscess, a pus-filled pocket near the tonsils that he knew about only from reading. It was too late for him to call a friend in infectious disease who might know more, so he turned to an online AI resource called Open Evidence. He entered her symptoms and asked the specialized chatbot for possible diagnosis. At the top of the bot's list was peritonsillar abscess. Among the symptoms it described were a severe unilateral sore throat and a hot potato voice, as if the patient were speaking with a mouthful of potatoes. It also said that most cases of this disorder were treated on an outpatient basis. Still, her illness seemed to have progressed very rapidly. I think you should go to the ER, he told her. That morning, the doctor had seen only a swollen tonsil and red throat. But now, 12 hours later, her brother could see that the entire right side of her throat was not only red, but also swollen. She didn't want to go. She had an appointment with an ear, nose, and throat doctor the next day, and she hated going to the emergency room. But if an infection was spreading that fast, it might be dangerous for her to wait until morning. The swelling could even block her airway. She finally agreed to go. It was 1:30 in the morning when she was seen by a physician assistant at the Massachusetts General Hospital emergency room. Her temperature and heart rate were normal, but the right side of her face seemed a little swollen. Her tonsil was enlarged and seemed to be dotted with small patches of white discharge. The tonsillar pillars, the structures supporting and surrounding the tonsil, were also red and so swollen that they nearly hid the gland. The uvula, the tear-shaped tissue that hangs in the back of the throat, was a normal size and was not deviated to the left, as it would be in some severe infections. The PA gently prodded the flesh with a tongue depressor. More give there would suggest a hidden abscess. She needed to be seen by the ENT doctors, he said, but first they'd get a CT scan. The imaging showed a pocket of fluid about the size of a large grape next to the swollen tonsil. The radiologist thought it was a peritonsillar abscess. The ENT reviewing the images on his screen remotely disagreed, saying the infection was in the tonsil itself. In either case, she would need to be evaluated by an ENT in person. She was given a dose of a powerful steroid, and for the first time in days, the pain relented. At 8 the next morning, the young woman was transported from the ER to the Mass Eye and Ear Clinic. She was examined by a resident who took one look at her throat and immediately agreed with the radiologist. This was definitely a peritonsillar abscess, and it needed to be drained. The patient agreed to the procedure. Minutes later, she was given a couple of shots of lidocaine. The surgeon brought in her sterile instruments. The patient glanced over, then decided she didn't want to see. She closed her eyes as the surgeon reached into her mouth. She felt nothing. She briefly tasted metallic blood until the surgeon sprayed her mouth with salt water, and then it was done. As soon as she could, she looked in the mirror at the incision. It was huge. The surgeon prescribed 10 days of antibiotics and assured her that she would heal within a week or so. And she did. I spoke with her brother recently. Doctors are not supposed to take care of family members. Did he think that fact that she was his sister affected how he saw her case? Maybe, he told me. He was worried about her differently because she was his sister. On the other hand, who but a sister would have given him this kind of blow-by-blow? And the possibility that an infection was moving as fast as hers seemed to be would have prompted his recommendation to go to the ER no matter who had asked. With any patient, he told me, it's always better to be safe than sorry. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 14th issue of the New York Times Magazine. Your reader has been Evelyn. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the USA Today. Following that at 2 o'clock is episode number 5 of To Rescue the American Spirit by Brett Baer. Stay with us for these readings and more.
The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service now presents a reading of articles and features